to the extent that I recognize history, I think that it is most accurately punctuated by that truth that is most dangerous to speak. The era is defined by that truth which is most dangerous to speak. And that's not just ancient history and contemporary history. That is your own self, your own history, relationships, even up to the divine itself. Some truths just can't be spoken, but we still need to speak. And I think that there's this German song that goes all the way back actually to the 13th century, Die Gedanken sind frei. I think that's how it's pronounced. Die Gedanken sind frei, which is thoughts are free. And it's essentially, I think peasants are singing about this in the sense that they can't say whatever they want, but they know that within their head, it's true and needs to exist. And the one stanza that I always think about is, and this is translated from German, but, and if I am thrown into the darkest dungeon, all these are futile works, because my thoughts tear all gates down and all walls apart. Thoughts are free. So even back then, people felt that there was some sanctity to the fact that no one can control. I mean, there's another one, thoughts are free, who can guess them? They fly like night shadows, no person can know them, no hunter can shoot them. And so it'll always be, thoughts are free, die Gedanken sind frei. And there's all these examples, of course, in history of people that knew the truth but couldn't speak it. So, Solzhenitsyn and Galileo and Copernicus and Hypatia and Roger Bacon and Tyndale, the guy that translated the Bible into English, which was a huge deal because it was supposed to be, I believe, in Latin only, so that only a certain class could interpret it. So we had this idea. Now we think about the Word of God being like, of course, spread it everywhere, say it to everybody. It should be everywhere, and everyone should understand it. And yet, here's a guy getting punished, I forget how, but severely, for just translating it into English. But nevertheless, that was what defined the era. And so in thinking about these barriers between consciousness and presence, well, when we think internally, they're just some things that we can't come to terms with. And it's always within us to want to say it and to say it to other people. And when I'm thinking about the purpose of poetry and the purpose of art, I think that I took it for granted a lot. I was having discussions with my friends about how, pop music, I've come to realize like pop and fashion being just commoditized and low resolution and irony poisoned. When no one can have a legitimate thought or feeling because it has to be hidden behind some kind of layer of a joke or not taking something seriously, conspicuously. Like there's humor. But humor is actually more of a truth-telling mechanism than it is a distancing mechanism, because you can say so much more with true humor and bypass one's defenses, sort of your barriers, because you're laughing. It's apoplexy that's sort of taken over your rational faculties and just lets you feel a thought. So comedy is very important. I'm very inspired by stand-up comedians, actually. They're some of the best communicators. They speak the most truth to power. And even traditionally, the only person that could really tell the king what's what was the court jester, because it was entertaining, it was non-confrontational, but yet the thoughts were transmitted from, the people and the peasants and the jester to the king. And that is, again, presence breaking down barriers to consciousness. And it's done through humor, but it's done through art too. So when your pop culture and music is bereft of sincerity, and this was a David Foster Wallace thing, absolutely. When it's bereft of sincerity, you can't articulate your own sincerity and sincere feelings, because, it's tricky with me. Like, I think in essays, and I have to speak in paragraphs, and sometimes it should just be words. And I think that there is a certain formidability to that, where people think that I'm always thinking like 90 steps ahead, or I'm writing someone's history for them, and it's not that. It's just, if somebody tells me that I have a way with words, I think, yes, because if I didn't, I'd die, because there's nothing but words in there. there's always trade-offs to these things, but I just think that I know that I can talk around and above and through and for people, or at least it seems like it. And maybe there's this impression that I can't learn anything, that I can't listen, that I can't hear somebody speak. And God, do I ever hear you speak? Like, if you give me a thought, it is refracted a million times, and every angle is considered. And I think too, like that is sort of the mechanism of a barrier between presence and consciousness. Just this feeling that I'm not necessarily present or conscious, but I am. And I think that there was a way in which I was always trying to perfect communication. So, brevity, levity, and objectivity was my sort of little catchphrase for a while, where I would just try to compact the most and do the most sort of linguistic and semantic and narrative compression so that I could speak the most without having to rely on words and just sort of flooding the field with ideas. And I realized that the most perfect speech is that which is artful, that which is poetic, that which is musical, because there's just something about it that bypasses one's rational faculties, which are necessary, but goes more towards the aspect of presence. So to speak with precision in the service of the Gestalt, to speak with precision in the pursuit of feeling, in the pursuit of understanding, in pursuit of communicating that which is in my mind to the other person the most. And that is where the poetic register comes in. But there's also this, I had this conversation with somebody about sort of Straussianism, which is where when there is a dangerous truth, one has to communicate in a way with plausible deniability. So plausible deniability being sort of like, coffee is never coffee at midnight. Sometimes, even in the daytime, coffee is never really just coffee. And what it is you speak with plausible deniability. So there's this distinction between exoteric and esoteric, which is you've got the exoteric, which is the layer that people that aren't really paying attention, people that aren't really, don't really intuit deeper meaning, they're sort of blind to it. And I think that by definition, tyrants have to wall themselves off from poetry and poetic language. People who are very much about control and controlling the narrative, and just sort of these men who, walk in dimly lit shadows and determine my future for me, to borrow a line. They don't feel the poetic register. They don't understand art. They don't see its purpose. They don't see how it is sort of a sacred form of communication between the people who are present and who are aware. And so the Straussianism is a way to speak these uncomfortable truths in a way that everyone gets, but you can always just say, well, I didn't mean that. You're imposing a meaning on that. You're projecting a meaning on that. I didn't say that. That's all on you. That's on you, man. That's in your head. And to be able to speak in sort of this double language of this sort of paradoxical speaking, this temporarily permanent language, however you want to call it, that is sort of the genius that allows people to make it in whatever time it is. And again, it's not even necessarily a historical time. It's not necessarily under the Soviets. Sometimes it's just you're at a place in your life where you just can't say certain things. You can't say things to yourself, to others. And it's all a very necessary process. And, I spoke a lot earlier about narrative giving you this ability to speak to things that are sometimes too bright, too radioactive to handle. But they allow you to manipulate them until you can understand the full breadth of them. And it's this very necessary process that you go on, that you engage in. And, if every attempt that you make towards that, you should be proud of, to never stay in stasis. And if this is the way to move on, this is the necessary way to move on. And that is, again, one of the most beautiful things about poetry. Because I remember I used to be really quite bad at it. I thought, well, there's no wrong answer, so thus it's all good. And I took sort of this postmodernist bent where I would just, I would write poetry and just like, who cares? No one can call me on it. And that was obviously inauthentic. It didn't mean anything to me. It was just sort of masquerading as profundity. just simple, I understood similes and metaphors. What more could there be to it? Well, it didn't make anybody weep. You know what I mean? Like it didn't really, it didn't really get to me. It didn't get to anybody. And another mistake that I would make too is, I would get poems, like people would write them for me. I mean, not often, but they do. And I mean, my immediate thing was to just deconstruct it, take it apart immediately, like try to see like what is the hidden meaning, what are they trying to say, and even sometimes to think, well, this is a matter of cowardice, this is somebody avoiding just saying the thing, just mean what you say and say what you mean. And it's something that I would have to reconcile because I'm obviously obsessed with semiotics and semiotic accuracy and agreement, but that's for things of material consequence and things where accuracy is absolutely important. And I will defend that because it's just an airplane you do not want your fuel lines assembled poetically. You don't want the flight computers with a poetic compilers. You don't want the hydraulics having a sense of ennui and longing that particular day. And it may seem basic, but it's just, you have to be able to hold paradox, and you have to be able to see the necessity of the poetic for the fact that it is sort of the native language of the soul. And I don't think that we're irreducible to just mechanics. I can't define the soul, but I know it's real. And that's another paradox. I accept and leave, and there it is. So when I would get poems, I would deconstruct them, and I would try to find their meaning and suss them out. But at one point, there was a moment where I got one, and I just had the sense that I'm not supposed to deconstruct this. It would be like a crime against it. It would be hurting it. And all that I thought and said was just, it's beautiful. I just know that it's beautiful prior to registering it intellectually. And I'm just going to let the meaning find me. And I try to do the opposite now when I write something. Meaning is to find the words. And that's how it works. And so in communicating uncomfortable truths in all layers and sort of dealing with things that are sort of radioactive and incomprehensible, because there will always be something that is incomprehensible and hard to deal with. It never stops. You may as well practice now because it never stops. You have to confront very deep and dark and awe-inspiring things, and you may as well develop the language to deal with them, and that language is the poetic. It is the ineffable. And when I'm thinking about this thing about the spiritual violence of having bad and superficial pop culture, I don't really need to name the names of the bad ones. I mean, walk into any big box store, just go into the mall for 5.5 seconds and you'll hear it pumping at you. And, I remember that, because I am a musician, I actually have an ear for music. And there's just something about all of the pop songs, like they sound, even though I know theory-wise, it may be different chord progressions. I can tell there's different recording techniques. I know that there's different drums and vocal affects used and different compression algorithms. Like I can go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And it all just sounds bloody generic to me. It just sounds like the same homogeneous sludge, despite the fact that I know that it isn't. And I think part of that is just the fact that I know that this was cynically designed and made by tyrants in a sense, because they do it in focus groups. They mix it in cars, like they sit in a car and they mix it based on the stereo. They don't mix it based on fidelity or a good pair of headphones. It's mixed in a car. Ironically, that was started by the band The Cars, which ironically, again, is actually a great band. Some of the first people to do digital recordings, actually, but there is sort of poppy things that come back and surprise you. So I actually have two friends that are music majors. I didn't plan that, and they both have this immediate recognition that the Britney Spears song Toxic is actually beautiful and well composed and incredibly compositionally interesting. And generally, like we all sort of have these soft spots for pop musicians that, despite all the issues, actually do things quite well. I mean, trying to think, like one of the greatest ones. I mean, this is kind of dated, but Lady Gaga. when she was still going by Stephanie, she did a cover of this Led Zeppelin song. I think it's Jamaica or Jamaica or whatever. But it's just, oh, baby, can you hear me crying? Dun, dun. I mean, and that was just, she really put her heart and soul into it, and you can tell that she loves the source material. But with all these music major friends, I mean, all of us have this common story of a piece of music. Like there's there's this thing about like the bicameral mind theory, which is essentially that people didn't actually have an internal monologue forever. And then when they started to, they just said, oh, there's a voice in my head. Well, clearly that must be the voice of God. And there was this moment where people's just like inner voice switched on and it was never described before. So now they're like, oh, okay. So everything has changed significantly. The voice of God is in my head. And we all sort of seem to have this moment where we have like an artistic awakening, a musical awakening. And, for some of us, I won't really name the songs for everybody. And there's some really weird ones. Like there'll be video game music in there, and there'll be classical music. And with me, I remember the one that really opened up my head the first time was this Paul Simon song called Duncan from his first solo album. Now, the thing with Paul Simon is that, I mean, I have this sort of comforting saying to myself that, like, no matter what happens, a man can reinvent himself endlessly. Like a man can reinvent himself endlessly. That is one of the greatest articles of hope in my sort of internal lexicon of these things. And he was just like a singer-songwriter. He had Garfunkel, and you thought, okay, well, this was genre-changing music. No one can top this. And like, you can just park your car at the red lights and move on, right? But he didn't. He moved on from that. And then he has the 70s where he produces like these beautiful albums that are at the same level of quality as the stuff that he did in his 20s. And then he moves on in the 80s to Graceland. Now he kind of drops off, but I mean, that's like 30 years of just high quality output. And it's entirely different from the last, and he doesn't have to do any callbacks. I mean, if you want to talk about a man who is artistically present, I mean, that is Paul Simon. But he has this song, Duncan, and I heard it, I don't know, when I was like 7 years old or something. And there's this, it's got a double bass in it, and it has these like Peruvian flutes that just hypnotize me entirely. And the song itself is about this guy that just, leaves home from the Maritimes and just like walks down a turnpike, just destitute, just trying to find work. And the arc of that story, and just, like it is, I wouldn't even say it's a love story. There's just like an encounter in it, and it's left ambiguous, but, there's this line near the end of it where he's just like, I was playing my guitar, lying underneath the stars, just thanking the Lord for my fingers. And I mean, that's hit me since I was a little kid. Just the idea of like looking at the stars, and just the guitar is like his sort of gift. Like, I've been given something to articulate myself, my interiority. Like I can do something with it. I can speak to the world, and it's a God-given gift to do so. And regardless of what led up to that, it's just, that is his reminder of presence with the divine. There it is. And so, yes, I mean, in the political realm, there's all these certain ways to just say the forbidden truths in a lot of different ways. And, technologically, I would think that we kind of take for granted the fact that we have encryption. Back in the day, they had to use Navajo code speakers. And Navajo was just like a language that was so unbelievably outside the realm of any other sort of Anglo-Saxon Germanic language. Like, it was a branch in and of itself. And its rules are so complicated, no one could tease it out, no one could figure it out. I just think of this very old joke about when you give a testimony, it's just like, in your own words, tell us what happened. Well, I don't know, I've been using everybody else's words for all this time. And then, you had the Enigma machine, and I guess, well, Turing, another person sort of punished for speaking his own truth, I suppose, to the world. But, in the 90s, there was actually a movement where they would have just made encryption illegal so that all of your communications could be interrupted and just taken and read and there you go. And you would think, like, what kind of chilling effect would that have on people's speech, plain speech, because I think that one of the most beautiful things is like, and the hardest thing to do is to speak with absolute sincerity, which means that there is no speaking in code. There is no plausible deniability. At some point, it has to collapse into the true thing, like into the completely unvarnished, unhedged truth that is undeniable and is sort of indelible. It's ink. Once it's said, it can't be unsaid. And that is a sacred process in and of itself. But to arrive at that point does not happen unless one has the poetic register, does not have the interpretive register, a way to sort of experiment. And, when you have sort of two people, or even within yourself, the way that you speak poetically, and then it gets more specific and more specific, and there's this sort of give and take, this sort of back and forth, this conversation between the layers of intimacy and sincerity. That is all necessary to reach this inflection point where that which is said cannot be unsaid. And there was this, how do I even do this one? Because there was, a friend of mine is a fan of this 19th century Lebanese poet, Khalil Gibran. And I think they had said something about they like the one on charity and then the one on love. And then I just said, okay, well, can I just see the one on love? And, little did I know that much like an unexploded ordnance in no man's land, sitting dormant for 100 years, here is this poem sort of waiting to disassemble me. So this is how it goes. When you love, you should not say, God is in my heart, but rather, I am in the heart of God. And think not you can direct the course of love, for love, if it finds you worthy, directs your course. Love has no other desire but to fulfill itself. But if you love and must, needs have desires, let these be your desires. To melt and be like a running brook that sings its melody to the night. To know the pain of too much tenderness, to be wounded by your own understanding of love, and to bleed willingly and joyfully. To wake at dawn with a winged heart, to give thanks for another day of loving, to rest at the noon hour and meditate love's ecstasy, to return home at eventide with gratitude, and then to sleep with a prayer for the beloved in your heart and a song of praise upon your lips. Often lately, I've ended these with a poem of my own, but now I'll say, I hear them too.